Greetings and salutations and welcome to this very special Illegitimate Legends. I have decided to place them to the test, AP Warwick and AP Xin Zhao in the final duel to decide which truly is the better AP build. Both champions are exceptional duelists capable of taking on almost any single opponent with a ridiculous amount of sustain. But which truly is the better build? Watch this video and find out. Round 1 had me controlling our AP Warwick and AP Xin Zhao in the very capable hands of one JC Bambi. I went for a very early sustain build, as AP Warwick is wont to do, whereas Bambi went for the Stinger first and at that tiny little bit of AP. The early attack speed and cooldown reduction on Xin Zhao gave him a massive early aggression advantage. I was expecting a fight in which I would be able to slowly whittle Xin Zhao over time, tearing away at him with my swipes when I could, but instead he went for the very early push and tore me down completely. Unable to risk reaching the minions to heal, Xin Zhao quickly took dominance of the lane and went in for first blood. I had nothing I could do to stop his aggression. Under the tower, however, the situation quickly changed. I was available to get the healing I need to bring my sustain into play and whittle down that pesky Xin Zhao. Sure, Xin Zhao has pretty good sustain himself, but it doesn't pick up until the particularly late game, and it will never compete with Warwick's burst sustain in the mid and early games. I could sit there indefinitely, simply waiting for Xin Zhao to make a mistake, which he eventually did, taking one too many tower shots and falling to my claws. This bought me the room I needed to farm up, push back, get a little bit of tower damage in, and level up. After level 6, Warwick automatically has the advantage. He can simply deny Xin Zhao's sustain for a period of time, and at the same time deal a fairly high amount of damage. All of a sudden, I've entered the phase in which Warwick is the dominant one, where my range and my sustain is outclassing anything Xin Zhao has to offer. At this point, I have enough health and enough sustain that nothing Xin Zhao lands on me will actually stick. I will out-heal anything he can do, and more importantly, I will out-heal his healing. His W simply doesn't grant the health that my Q did, and so Warwick enters a phase where his range, his mobility, and his sustain give him complete lane dominance. Like, Xin Zhao, so long as I had mana, Xin Zhao couldn't get anywhere near me without risking his life. And that advantage, it was huge. I could do almost anything I wanted, farm up, and deny Xin Zhao the farm that he really kinda wanted. However, all things were not perfect in the land of Warwick. I simply lacked the speed I needed to kill minions, and so I couldn't actually push the lane. I was trapped in a situation where Xin Zhao wasn't dying enough, and I wasn't able to push against him. The tide soon turned, and once both of us had reached about level 13, Xin Zhao's power and item advantage meant that he suddenly was the one in control. He could push minions far faster than I ever could, and whilst my damage was landing on him, it wasn't sticking. His sustain was enough to outdo my damage. All of a sudden, I'm in the loss. He manages to take one tower and with very clever use of his ultimate, score the kill on me, allowing him another tower and the inhibitor. I had nothing on this Xin Zhao. Once he reached this point, once he reached the later game when he had more items and his sustain came into play, Warwick's dominance was gone. My ability to outrange and outmaneuver him was no longer relevant due to his slows, and his sheer damage potential meant that whilst I was strong, I wasn't strong enough to beat Xin Zhao. With a massive amount of gold spent and an array of new items, I was back in control. I had the damage I needed again. I could fight Xin Zhao, but it still wasn't enough. Despite my ability to kill him, I still couldn't push the lane. I had no items that granted me extra damage on auto attacks. I hadn't a malady. I hadn't the attack speed I needed to actually beat down the minions, and because of that loss of inhibitor, I couldn't push against the tide. I could survive it, I could hold it still, but I could never push his minions back, and Xin Zhao just took every opportunity he could to fight me. Every time he fought me, my minions lost ground because I wasn't fighting against the minions. I could win, I was strong again, but I couldn't secure a real victory. Eventually, Xin Zhao found his moment. Using massive attack speed, sustain that rivaled my own, and very, very clever use of his ultimate and his tower, Xin Zhao secured a kill on me. This kill was the beginning of the end. Xin Zhao took that opportunity and pushed so hard. Xin Zhao, capable of destroying minion waves in seconds, simply walked into my base against everything I had and just kept pushing. Xin Zhao took his advantage, pushed hard. By the time I respawned, my first Nexus Tower was gone, and nothing I could do could stop him from taking the second. Without the Nexus Tower hitting him, my damage was not quite enough to rival his sustain, even with the tower on his side. I was left with nothing that could counter him, and he just pushed and pushed, took both towers, killed me with the help of 2 super minions, and that was game. I had nothing I could do to rival his power, and he used that. For round 2, we swapped champions. I had control of Xin Zhao this game, and JC Bambi found himself controlling Warwick. And while he used a very different build to mine, and I used a very different build to him, the game went much the same way. I lost the first round due to my desire to get my malady first, instead of going straight for that stinger. And my cooldown reduction and attack speed just wasn't the same as his was. I didn't have that early potential that he had, and so I lost my first fight, but still, the game followed the same pattern. I, as Xin Zhao, simply got outclassed by Warwick. In the mid-game, Warwick's range and ability to harass me even when I was under my tower meant that I didn't have any lane control. I could fight him, and my sustain was just enough that I could stay alive and in the game, but it just wasn't really going to get me anywhere. But then we hit level 13. Then we hit that peak. I've got all my abilities up to a really good point. My damage is really good. I've got a sheen. I've got everything I need to start hurting Warwick, and the game turns around. While Warwick has that really total dominance in the mid-game, Xin Zhao has the end game completely under control. Once he hits level 18, Warwick simply can't fight him. They can duel, and maybe in a duel Warwick will win. It's very, very close and depends on how far along they are in items. But with minions in the mix, with the idea of pushing in the mix, Xin Zhao will always win. His AoE and his damage against minions far, far superior. So we have to face the question, which is the better champion? Which champion does the AP build better? In this situation, the clear victor is Xin Zhao. His endgame dominance and the fact that he won both rounds means that it's fairly obvious. Xin Zhao won. But let's take a look at the real situation. Take a look at a 5v5. Warwick actually has a lot more potential. Xin Zhao can't do very much until he reaches that peak, and it's a lot harder to reach that peak if you can't secure the kills. If it weren't for the passive extra gold and the passive experience I was getting, just because of the map we were using, I don't think I would have won the game when I was in Zhao. And I feel exactly the same, maybe not to the same extent, but I feel that Bambi would have had the same trouble in pushing against me. Once you reach the point where you're in control with Warwick, Xin Zhao can't even farm. He can't do anything against you, and that lack of gold means that he wouldn't get the items. He wouldn't get the levels. He wouldn't get to the point where he could ever beat Warwick. And Warwick, simply because of who he is, would take all the farm, would take all the power, and eventually you wouldn't be at the point where you're both level 13 and you've both got good items and then Xin Zhao wins. You'd be at the point where Warwick's level 15, 16 against Xin Zhao's 13, and Warwick has an abundance of items and gold that Xin Zhao just doesn't have. It's really hard to figure out which one of these two champions is actually the victor, and Bambi and I, neither of us could say which was the better champion. But on reflection, I feel that Warwick takes the cup in a real scenario. His ability to assassinate and his ability to actually assist his team, actually bring something to the table in the mid-game, and even to some extent in the early game. Not to mention the already mentioned in the video, his ability to tower dive. This being mentioned in my AP Warwick video, not this one, because it never happened. His ability to tower dive and use his team to his advantage means that Warwick simply has much more control, but in a flat, perfectly even scenario, Xin Zhao wins in the end. Nowhere near in the start, but in the end, Xin Zhao just controls everything. Thank you all for watching this Illegitimate Legends duel. I will be back next week with more Illegitimate Legends, and if you'd like to see more duels, recommend some champions for me. Send me a message or drop me a comment and say, I want to see these two builds compete. I want to see these two illegitimate champions face off to see which truly has the advantage in a particular fight. Thank you all for watching, and good night.